This week on Zilog and Moto, I'm doing something that, actually I do quite a lot on this channel, and it's time to learn something. And to do that, I'm going to pose a question. What exactly is the PGA European Tour? Now, keep in mind, I'm an American, real shocker there, right? But also, I'm not exactly super well versed into the world of golf. Like, I know some things. I've heard of certain familiar big-time golfers. I know the difference between a wood, an iron, and a putter, and I know that if your ball ends up in a bunker, you're probably not in for a good time, especially if the course is in Ireland for some reason. Growing up, I always thought that the PGA was the same thing all around the world, and that it just had, different tours for players that lived in different geographic regions. Of course, I was familiar with just the PGA Tour, as it was the North American-based tour, and even if there wasn't a ton of time devoted to it on SportsCenter, you still would see the occasional highlight of a crazy shot or a rundown of who did what at a specific tournament. And then, of course, there would be the majors and things like the Ryder Cup, where it was, always emphasized that we were seeing the best of the best because we were seeing the best players from both the PGA Tour and the PGA European Tour. And, of course, not the LIV Tour yet because, thankfully, that particular disaster hadn't been invented yet. However, I should probably pause for a second because, I'm sure that there's some of you out there that don't know me, and, you're now confused because you've never heard of the LIV Tour, and you don't get that last joke. Well, hi, my name is Dave, and somewhere Greg Norman is choking in the last round of a golf event again. Anyway, I'm out to collect and review the nearly 1,280 titles released in the English language for the Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega or Mega CD as the case may be, and finally the 32X. Basically, if I can plug it into a Genesis either by itself or with some sort of add-on, and be able to read what's up on the screen, I'm trying to get a copy of it and review it for posterity, with both looks at that original packaging and gameplay captured from original hardware whenever possible. All making jokes that only golf nerds get aside, what I found out this week when doing research for this video is that the PGA Tour and the PGA European Tour are not merely branches of the same organization, split for regional consumption. The PGA Tour, as I know it, is a golfing tour that stems originally from the Professional Golfers Association of America, which was founded in 1916. The PGA European Tour, on the other hand, is a completely separate organization that was spun out of the Professional Golfers Association, which was the original PGA created in 1901 to organize golfers in the UK and Ireland. The whole point is, when someone says PGA, you can't assume that it's all the same thing. And of course, this intro would have more merit 4 years ago before the PGA European Tour was rebranded as the DP World Tour, but, well, timing has never been my strong suit. I say as I host a YouTube channel that was out of style 5 years before I started it. Now, not assuming it's the same thing is probably a good attitude for me to have going into this week's review, which is for PGA European Tour, which was released in April of 1994 as a direct follow-up to the previous year's PGA Tour Golf II. So if you're wondering why I'm reviewing this instead of PGA Tour Golf III, that's why. Now don't worry, we'll get to that one eventually, but for now, it's time to pack up the clubs and take a trip to Europe, with stops in England, France, Spain, and Switzerland. Is PGA European Tour just PGA Tour Golf II with a change of scenery? Or is there some hot new golfing action here that showed EA wasn't just resting on their laurels from the previous year? Well, we'll get into all that and more, but first, a look at the North American package for a European game, or something. And here's my copy of PGA European Tour for the Genesis. This copy is in decent enough shape for a sports game. The outer cover has been nicked up a little bit here and there, but no huge tears, and the outer cover has done its job protecting the inner cover, with it not having any sun bleaching or water damage, and only the tiniest amount of edge wear in the corners. I have no idea when I picked this one up, but I'm pretty sure it was early on, and for some bizarre reason, I think I grabbed it before finding a copy of PGA Tour Golf II. Just one of those weird collecting things where I wasn't in the right place at the right time, I guess, because overall, this is certainly the less common title of the two, at least in the United States. For some reason, playing with European players on European courses wasn't as popular to North American audiences. Figure that one out. Regardless of whether it's slightly harder for you to run across or not, if you track one down, it will most likely cost you under $10. As far as the front cover goes, with this being a March of 1994 release, it's the first game in the series to get the white EA Sports formatting.
Fun fact, the first game to get the all-white EA Sports design overall? Not Madden 94, not NHL 94, but the original Bill Walsh College Football. I don't mind the white design in and of itself, but it does annoy me anytime I watch an episode of AVGN, and on the section of the wall in the Nerd Cave where all of the Sega games are, they just mix in the EA Sports titles with all the Master System games. I guess because they're all white? Very strange behavior. Regardless, as far as the actual artwork on the cover goes, it's fine, due to being pretty boring, just like the sport itself. If anyone has any clue who the golfer is on the inset, leave a comment below. I wasn't able to find an answer online, and AI was its usual less than helpful self. I am so glad we waste water and electricity on all that. Of note, though, are the flags below the picture, which indicate the home countries of the courses that are included in the game. Sorry, Ireland and Scotland, no courses for you this time around, regardless of how historically important you might have been to the game of golf. Flipping over the back end, there's a solid layout with everything nicely organized, and with the quote-unquote new features being the focus of the design right in the middle. How new those features are is debatable, and we'll get into that more in the review. As much as the front cover is fairly bland, the rear design makes up for things, but hopefully you've got the magnifying glass that you use to read the back of PAL cases nearby, because that is some small text. I really like the focus on the 10 stars of the game at the bottom. There are some names there that even I was familiar with, and showing off the 5 courses included in the game over to the right was a good choice as well. Just a lot of things here to catch your eye. Opening up the package, and the manual and cartridge have seen some wear, but they're both serviceable. The manual is the traditional large Electronic Arts manual from the time period, consisting of the usual 64 pages. Like always, the game doesn't really need 64 pages to explain itself, so after the game is run through, the last 16 pages or so are bios of the 10 featured players, and then write-ups on the 5 courses included in the game to give players some background as to where you're playing this time around and with whom. No complaints here, and I'll always take potentially too much information rather than not enough. One small note though, if you flip over the back, the white cover era also serves as the beginning of the 4-way play era, as you'll see advertised here. I should probably keep an eye out for one of those at the next convention I go to. I mean, I'll never use it, but it would be cool to have in the collection just because. Okay, that's the package. Let's hit the links and see if anything has changed since the last time around other than the geography. If you've seen my reviews of the PGA Tour series on the channel previously, you know that I hold the games in fairly high regard, and in some ways I tend to enjoy them more than sports that I actually watch on TV or had participated in the past. And I don't really know why that is, but there's just something about them that provides a nice sense of calm along with just overall enjoyment. Well, I mean calm when I don't completely blow a 4-foot putt or shank a drive 40 yards off course because I didn't time the stroke correctly, of course. But as annoying as those can be, the opposite is also true, and there's nothing better than just absolutely nailing an approach shot or a crazy long putt that had no business going in the hole. What I'm trying to say is that historically I've given these games in the series some high ratings from a star perspective. The original PGA Tour Golf got a 3-star rating. PGA Tour Golf II got 4 stars, as I felt like it was an improvement from that first title and not just a yearly rehash. And while PGA Tour Golf for the Master System only got 2 stars, that was really only due to a control issue, as the bulk of the game was impressive for being scaled down to run on less powerful hardware. With PGA European Tour, the game has a lot to live up to in my eyes, and for it to get another solid rating, it's not going to be enough for it to rest on its laurels. I'm going to need to see something new, because, especially with a sport like golf, you could always just go back and play PGA Tour Golf II instead and be satisfied. I don't know this to be certain, but I suspect that this desire to create a novel product is part of why, for this release, the game is centered around the PGA European Tour rather than just releasing PGA Tour Golf III. And yes, that game does exist, as EA released it 9 months after PGA European Tour, right before Christmas of 1994, but, that's a review for another day. To start going over the quote-unquote new features, I'm just going to go straight from the advertised features on the back of the package shown in the last section. The first one mentioned is 5 new European courses and tournaments. Now, that statement makes it sound a bit larger than it is, because only the most ardent golf fan is going to actually care about the name of a specific tournament, but it is technically correct. PGA European Tour allows players to play a round on 5 all-new real-life courses that golfers on the PGA European Tour would actually compete on. Players that are familiar with the series will note that having 5 courses is 1 real-life and 1 fantasy course less than PGA Tour Golf II had in total, but in defense of PGA European Tour, 4 of those 7 courses included in PGA Tour Golf II were actually holdovers from the original game. So technically, PGA European Tour has the biggest collection of new courses of any game in the series thus far. As far as the 5 new courses are concerned, I can't speak to things like how accurate to real life the courses are, but what I can say is that the courses feel realistic, and they're all clearly different courses. So, for instance, when you play around at the Wentworth Club, it's got a vastly different feel to the Forest of Arden, which is, by the way, not going to be the course for you if you haven't figured out how to hit the ball straight yet, due to being in, well, a forest. If you're a bit hydrophobic, you might want to avoid Le Golf National, as it seems to have more water hazards than any of the other courses, and if you hate sand traps, you may be tossing your controller when playing Valderrama. The whole point is, even though mechanically what you're doing doesn't change at all, each of the courses is a different experience, and it doesn't ever feel like, oh, this is just the same hole from the other course again, which speaks to how much effort was put into the design of the courses. The next feature listed on the back of the package is 10 new featured European players. And, this is true. The featured players in the game are different than who came before, with the likes of Tommy Armour III and Freddie Couples replaced with European Tour pros like Seve Ballesteros and Colin Montgomery. However, this doesn't really mean much because, like the next feature listed on the back of the package, 50 new European roster players, all it's really doing is giving the game a European feel. Which, is a good thing, especially for accuracy, don't get me wrong, but as far as the featured players go, their only purpose is to pop up before each hole to give you the recommendation as to how to attack it, and then you can play against them depending on the type of game mode that you've chosen. But it's not like you can choose to play as one of them to try to win a tournament or the match. I guess what I'm trying to say here is that while I like that there's been efforts made to actually try to recreate the feeling of being on the PGA European Tour with who you're competing against and with, this isn't something that's necessarily as important to having a new game experience as playing on different courses. Now, it would be strange if you were just playing on all of these European courses with the same roster of American players from the previous titles. Just think if you were playing a Premier League soccer game and everyone on Newcastle United was actually the roster from the Portland Timbers. Or, maybe don't do that. I think I probably just caused my UK audience to be as horrified with me as if I insisted on still calling the Open Championship the British Open. Spoiler alert, I do still call it the British Open because it's a much better name, but keep trying to make fetch happen, St. Andrews. The next 2 things listed on the back of the package as far as new features are concerned are back to the more meaningful side of things, as they both concern new game modes that have been added to the game. And at first you might be thinking, well, just how many ways are there to play golf? Previously, aside from the putting greens and the driving range, PGA Tour Golf II featured the ability to play a one-off round to compete in a standard 4-day 72-hole tournament, and then added the ability to compete against other golfers in a skins match, where money was on the line for every hole that was played. And of course, all of those game modes have been brought over to PGA European Tour. Well, believe it or not, there was something else to add. New to PGA European Tour is Shootout and Match Play. Shootout is a shorter game mode that pits 4 players against each other over 3 holes, with the player with the highest score being eliminated on each hole, usually leading to a closest to the pin tiebreaker. It's a relatively small addition, but I like it because it is a shorter game mode that provides a quick play experience, versus having to play all 18 holes, and having that intensity where literally every shot might be the one that's keeping you from elimination is pretty nice. Match play is exactly what it sounds like, and if you're familiar with golf, it's somewhat similar to the Ryder Cup, although it's nowhere near that extensive. Match play can be thought of like a playoff mode in other sports titles, where you go up against 7 other golfers in a single elimination tournament, with the goal being to win the most holes in a round so that you can move on. Like in shootout mode, having every single hole count directly against another golfer gives things a different feel. I wouldn't say it's better or worse than competing against the field in a standard tournament, it's just different, and in some ways I do prefer that one-on-one competition against the computer as you try to match them stroke for stroke. The last two, quote, new features listed on the back of the box are changing weather conditions and new sounding graphics, and I've got to say at this point, I think they were scraping the bottom of the barrel. In previous games, before you started a round, you would be told of the weather conditions, the same as you are in PGA European Tour, and if it was a windy day, you would see that on the course. Now granted, the wind might not be the same on every hole, but if the game told you it was going to be blustery before starting a round, you would expect to have to deal with wind at least in some capacity on every hole. PGA European Tour is the same way, so I'm not exactly sure what they're talking about when they say changing weather conditions. Perhaps there's slightly more variation in this title from hole to hole than there was before, but if that's the case, it's barely noticeable, and I certainly wouldn't call it out on the packaging. Then there's the supposedly new graphics and sound, and this is something that's probably best filed under technically correct. There are technically some new graphics in the game, with the portraits of the 10 new featured golfers being added, EA Sports announcer Ron Barr being replaced by a nameless new counterpart, and of course, new graphics detailing the 5 new course layouts. However, everything else remains largely unchanged, so if you were expecting some newer, more advanced presentation, this is not the game for you. As far as the sound goes, the main intro theme has been changed, so I'll give them credit there, but other than that, I'm not sure what else has changed. Some of the background music has definitely been brought over from the previous game, and if any of the sound effects have been changed, it's to such a small amount that I honestly can't tell. I'm certainly never going to complain about the sound in a game when Rob Hubbard is at the helm, but I do have to question EA advertising that the game has new sounds, when I largely couldn't tell the difference from what came before. Now that I've gone over the new features of PGA European Tour, whether legitimate or not, what about the game itself? Well, I think the short version of things is, if you enjoyed the previous 2 games in the series, there's no reason that you wouldn't like this game as well. All of that same golfing experience that made the first 2 games in the series great is back, just with a European backdrop instead of an American one. If you haven't played the first 2 games in the series, I think the best way to describe the game is that it's unapologetically fair. And that probably sounds like a strange phrase, but what I mean by that is, whatever happens on the course, however great or poorly, or mediocre for that matter, that you play, it all comes down to you. You are in control of how hard you hit the ball, which club you use, how much or little you adjust for wind resistance. It's all up to you, and your performance comes down to strategy and reflexes. There's no cheating by the computer to make things easier or more difficult. Most of the time, success in the game really comes down to, did you time your shot correctly or not? And the physics engine takes care of the rest. And honestly, that's a good analogy for golf in real life, because unless you're playing in some sort of Ryder Cup tournament, golf is the epitome of a solo sport, and how well you finish is solely up to you and the choices you make when on the course, which makes the game reflecting that, in this manner, one of the purest representations of a sports game that I've played. Ultimately, PGA European Tour isn't some kind of miracle worker. If you hate golf and the idea of playing around just bores you to tears, I completely understand, and PGA European Tour won't do anything to change your mindset, especially if you had tried one of the first 2 games in the series previously. However, if you haven't played any of these games and aren't adverse to trying something new that involves a golf club, you could do a lot worse than starting out your PGA experience here. I can definitely say that with the addition of match play and shootout mode, not to mention the full 4-player 4-controller support via the 4-way play adapter, PGA European Tour is the most complete game of the PGA series thus far, and makes for a great jumping on point. I could see some people complaining that the game is largely just a reskin of PGA Tour Golf II, and those people wouldn't necessarily be wrong, but I do think that's selling PGA European Tour a bit short. And yes, while the game is built on the same golfing engine that came before, PGA European Tour is much like a new racing game in a familiar series that comes with a new set of tracks. I mean, sure, you're just racing a car and trying to get around the track in the lowest amount of time possible, but it's still a new experience because you haven't raced on those specific tracks before, and the new golf courses in the game give that same new experience. Having said all that, and this probably will sound a bit like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, I'm giving PGA European Tour 3 stars. That is technically one less star than the 4 stars that I gave PGA Tour Golf II, so I'm sure that might not make sense seeing as how I just said that I think PGA European Tour is the better game all around. The difference is PGA European Tour came out a full year after PGA Tour Golf II, and while there was some innovation here, it's not enough for me to hand out 4 stars for a second time. But I will say that if I gave out half-star ratings, this would probably be a 3.5 from me, and if you wanted to give it 4 stars yourself, I certainly wouldn't argue.
And that's it for PGA European Tour for the Genesis. I'm really glad that I finally got around to playing this, and I think if I had anything else to add in this spot, it's that, if you've given some of these games a try and then put them down fairly quickly because, you got frustrated with the timing element of when to hit the ball, my recommendation would be to give the game another try, because one thing that I noticed with me is that this is a game where, you definitely get better at it the more you play it. The first day I played it for the review, I was clearly rusty, and I was hooking and slicing shots all over the place due to my timing being off. But by the second and third day, I was nailing drives one after the other, and it just felt natural. Next time on the channel, well, it's been almost a month of games on the Genesis, so, I think it's time to change things up a bit and give Sega's woefully underappreciated 8-bit wonder some love. After doing over 300 of these reviews, I'm starting to forget if I've already reviewed certain titles that, well, they didn't leave a lasting impression on me. So I'm going to have to do a better job of keeping track of that sort of thing. But to make things easier on myself this week when picking one out, I decided to pick a game that, honestly, I probably should have reviewed 300 episodes ago. Although, to be fair to myself, I probably didn't have a copy of it at the time, even though it's the game that I think most Master System fans in the United States would associate with the console. I should probably brush up on my paper, rock, scissors. Anyway, that's it for Zilog and Moto episode 308. If you liked what you saw here and want to see more, please think about liking and subscribing if you're so inclined, as it will help other people see these videos. But most importantly, whatever you like to play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later!